Hello, BookTube. All right, we're back and we're continuing and pressing on with 6.7K Q&A. So last question we did was how do you save Superman? I went on a rant. So now we're doing, this is Jack Riley who has a few questions. What is your opinion on Ian Banks' Culture series? I love it. It's fantastic. Stephen Erickson's Malazan Book of the Fallen series. I also love it. It's fantastic. I'm not sure how many people have stuck around. Have stuck around all the way to the end. Those massive, monstrous tomes that came out 6, 7 books into that series, but I read them all and thought they were really well done. And also, what is your opinion on the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe? We're trying to provoke another rant here. I know it's a behemoth. I know it's a juggernaut. It will last all of our lives. It cannot not. But I am no longer interested. I considered the Marvel Cinematic Universe to be an amazing feat, something that movie going, that cinema had not ever seen before, not even close. 20-something interconnected movies playing off each other and counting on the same springboard audience, all building towards an amazing climax involving everyone from all of those movies. That is a movie-making vision, the like of which no one ever had before. And it worked. It absolutely worked. And as a result, I think that the end of Avengers Infinity War, the end of Endgame, was the end for me of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That brought everything to a neat close. I know there were all sorts of threads that left the end of that movie to go off into new movies, but I don't think I'll be watching any of them. I like the organic feel of that ending, the last 30 minutes of that movie. I just cannot praise highly enough. I think it started off with Iron Man and it ends with Iron Man, and that arc I just think is too precious. So the future of the cinematic universe, I imagine, will be well, I've seen different models of what that future will be like. One is that Marvel will, the pieces are scattered, the actors are scattered, the properties are scattered, and that they will start to slowly build them back. We'll have a Thor movie in which Thor loses his beer gut and becomes himself again. We'll have a Black Widow movie. We'll have a couple of TV shows. That's one model. Another model is that Marvel will start to introduce and push forward agenda heroes, like they're doing in their comic books. So there seems to be someone fairly high placed at Marvel Comics with the power to make that happen, even when it is contrary to the market. The stuff doesn't sell. Nobody wants to read woke comics. The one model I've seen of the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is that it gets woke. That it's not only all minority and women characters, but it's minority and women characters routinely making racist and sexist comments about white people. I don't see that working, but one way or another, like I said, I won't be involved. I felt like I had capital in the game for that whole first, whatever you call it, from Iron Man to the end of Avengers. I felt like I had capital in the game because, like everybody else, I had read Marvel Comics and wanted to see them done well on the big screen, and been disappointed a lot of times. And this was so I don't know which model the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe will take, but I won't be watching with quite so intensely. John Petter says, one of the reasons why I was drawn to this channel was your ability to convey speech like concise written prose. I don't know how concise I've been in this Q&A. I wanted to ask you, as a non-American, why American prose continues to be so bloated and where I can find lean prose in that jungle of literature. I have my suspicions as to why American prose, modern American literary prose, is not only so bloated but so identical. And I think it's the enormous prevalence just from stem to stern of writing programs, of MFA writing programs. All of these people go to them. That's where they have sex with each other, and that's where they have sex with their future agents, and that's where they get their careers started. So many American writers are like that, and I know from firsthand experience that such writing programs, whether they want to or not, enforce a kind of uniformity. You are told in your classes that individuality is everything, but you read pretty quickly that your writing had better ape current trends or the trends of your most famous teacher if you want to do well. As a result, the writing that we get coming out of these programs is carefully mannered and buttoned down and smoothed at the edges and lifeless. I think that's what largely accounts for it. And as to where to look to find prose that isn't like that, there isn't any one place. I'm afraid what you have to do to find prose that isn't like that is do something like what I do, which is to read literally everything. And that's not going to be possible for a lot of people. I will do my best on this channel to sing the praises of stuff that jumps out, stuff that is real instead of corporate. But other than that, that's what you'd have to do. You'd have to look at the new releases for literary fiction every year and read them all. I was about to say I wouldn't envy you, but I do that, so I don't know what that means. Let's see here. Wandering Inga says, I've got a question on the topic of not sub-vocalizing while reading. I've been practicing doing this, but I keep tripping over names of people and places, especially foreign names. My brain wants to sub-vocalize them. Do you have any tips on how to overcome this? What we're talking about here, for those of you who might be new to the channel, is a subject I've brought up many times before, which is that a lot of people, when they read, I would say most people, encouraged not only by the prevalence of TV, but also by the prevalence of audiobooks, tend to say their prose when they're reading it silently. They tend to sound out the words in their mind when they're reading it silently, and that hobbles you. If you do that, that hobbles you to the speed at which you can read out loud. And you do not need to do that. You do not need to do that. Reading doesn't need to work that way. That is a bad habit. You can read without sub-vocalizing. You can just take the words in. You can bypass the vocalizing part of your brain completely. You do this and many times during your day. It's just with reading prose, people tend not to do it. And it slows you down. It slows you down enormously. All it is a tick. It's a habit. And that is the answer to the question, do you have any tips for overcoming it? Right now, your brain is balking at proper names and foreign names and wanting to sub-vocalize them. But with time, with practice, it won't want to do that anymore. That's the only thing that I can recommend if you want to overcome that little stumble, is just to keep doing it. Just keep practicing. You've spent years, probably your whole lifetime, sub-vocalizing. So that's a lot of momentum to overcome. Don't expect to, fix it in a day. The history shelf. Peg at the history shelf. Back in the 1970s, she used to write reviews. Her question is, were you a member of the Jesuits at one time? No, I was not. JV says, what do you do with all the books you receive, read, and don't want to keep? And what do you enjoy about romantic books? Well, in terms of the books that I get and don't want to keep, I have a number of ways to dispose of them. It depends on what the book is and where the venues are. I have charities that I donate to. I have libraries that I donate to. I have a lot of the books. I mentioned it on this channel before. I hope that I don't ever sound like I'm complaining. I'm actually honored. But a lot of those books go out to the rest of you. A lot of them do. So my postal bill is fairly substantial every week, but it's nice to send them to good homes. And what do you enjoy about romantic books? I'm assuming you mean romance novels. And what I love about them is that the particular kind that I like, the Regency romance novels, the old-style Regency romance novels, what I like most about them is that they are a completely known quantity that is dedicated to fun. They are dedicated to fun. They are not raising deep social issues. They are not going to end in tragedy. They are not going to have anyone mauled or disfigured or dismembered. And sometimes you need that. I do. Sometimes I need that. Sometimes if I've read 4 or 5 heavy books or even 2 or 3 bad books, I want to pick The Magnificent Match off the shelf and read just a romp in Regency England, and that has no consequences whatsoever. Let's see here. Gail Doherty says, where did you go to college? The American Midwest is one of the foremost theories as to where I went to college. There are a couple of claimants, scholarly traditions otherwise, that name other locations, but the American Midwest seems to be the front runner. Do you think advanced academic lit crit is a bunch of bloviating blowhards or the path to true enlightenment? It is junk. Absolute junk. Advanced academic lit crit. So not what I do, not book reviews, and not long book essays like what those people in that books on bookshelf do, but actual literary criticism is junk. Worthless. With 1 or 2 exceptions. Not 1 or 2 authors who are exceptions, or 1 or 2 books that are exceptions out of 10,000. So you can ignore it and you won't be missing anything. Margaret Yo asks, how many languages do you read and speak? How and why did you learn them? How I learned them was almost always by immersion, almost never in the school. And why I learned them was usually necessity, because I needed them in order to read documents in that language, or I needed them because I was living in that country and wanted to walk around without fumbling and asking for an artichoke when I want a pair of socks or something like that. And how many? aside from dead languages, which I'm assuming don't count here, I have what was once upon a time the standard smattering of Romance languages. That once upon a time it was completely normal for, or not. Once upon a time it wasn't weird. Now we live in a monoglot world. America, anyway, is a resolutely monoglot world. Americans don't know any other languages and don't even know they exist and don't want to. And why should they? You go anywhere, and I know young people in other countries. I know a couple of young people in Indonesia, and a couple of young people in Japan, who work hard every day, even on their days off from their 9-to-5 job, which in Japan is a 7 to 10:30 at night job. They still work hard every day to learn English because they consider it to be a massive advantage in all aspects of their world: personal, cultural, professional. So, but once upon a time that wasn't as true as it is now. And so if you were in Italy, for instance, it would behoove you to know Italian, or the weird kind of Italian that passes for the language in Venice. Music Bookaholic says, what are your favorite books on the history of the world? This is awful tricky. I get asked this question a lot, but histories of the world are weird stylistic exercises. They are not. They are exercises in what the author considers important. So they are mostly catalogs of omission and an amount of compression that is so extreme as to be worthless. So I don't know. I never know how to answer the question. J.M. Roberts, for instance, wrote a famous history of the world that I think it's a Penguin classic. I think it's a Penguin paperback now, the Penguin History of the World. And it is certainly good to read, but what it does for you when you could write an equally long and equally good history of the world that doesn't mention any of the things that Roberts mentions and mentions all the stuff he doesn't mention, then what is it that you're reading? One person's very idiosyncratic vision is what you're reading. For something like this, I would much rather pick, for instance, a few years ago, there was a big Smithsonian Institution book, I think it was made by DK, that was called History. And it was a big, heavily illustrated history of the world. It was fantastic. Something like that is more chronicle than it is a history. I'd recommend something like that a lot more than I would just a straight-up narrative history. Bryce Fuqua says, what is your opinion of the late Jim Lair's fiction? I didn't like any of it. Thought it was really bad. John David asked, do you watch your Social Blade stats? No, I don't. In each of the last 2 weeks, you've gained 130 subscribers per week. Good Lord, is that true? 130 of you are new? All those people are lurkers? You're currently 290 short of 7,000. Good Lord, another Q&A. It would be surprising if you didn't reach it by the end of February, if not closer to mid-month. Well, we're close to mid-month now. I'll have to see how many subscribers I have. Mr. Putler Gollum says, best postmodern authors besides William Gaddis, Don DeLillo, or Thomas Pynchon. Who's asking the questions here and who's answering them, bub? And also adds top 3 most readable philosophers besides Plato, Marcus Aurelius, Marx, and Camus. Well, if you've got all the answers, you don't need me. You ask the questions, all right? This is the point where the defense attorney would spring up in Law and Order and say to the judge that Sam Waterston's character is leading the witness. Sarah Hall says, I know you were not a child reader, but I would like to know what are some of your favorite children's classics. Well, it's true. I didn't read as a child. Now that I'm hearing this business about 130 new people every week, I'm starting to wonder how much stuff I should explain in the course of every video. I did not read as a child to all of you 260 people who might be new. But the children's classics, I imagine that a lot of the same ones that are true even if you did read when you were a kid. I've gone back and looked at a lot of them. I've made up for lost time. Nothing jumps right out. Mainly because I read so many children's books now, so many modern children's books for middle grade and also picture books, children's picture books, that it sort of blurs together. Nothing jumps right out, that's for sure. Let's see here. Jessica W. says, how did you and Sam Sachs meet? How long have you been friends? For those of you who might be new to the channel, Sam Sachs is the Fiction Chronicle, the author of the Fiction Chronicle for the Wall Street Journal, is an old friend of mine. And we met at Barnes & Noble, an old Barnes & Noble that doesn't exist anymore, big, ramshackle, old building right in downtown Crossing in Boston, where Sam and a bunch of other young people at the store were going through a quarter-life crisis. That was the title of a book that was in the store at the time, and I was roundly mocking all of them for it. It was a time when I ran the information desk, the first floor, the big information desk on the first floor, and was largely unaccountable to managers or to any kind of chain of command. I was mainly just interested in my customers, and they were just mainly interested in me. So I was allowed to terrorize the staff. I was allowed to bully people. I mocked people mercilessly, and Sam took to it. he took to it. That's why, when those of you who are new to the channel will not know, my old friend Deb used to work at that same store, and that is where the dichotomy between us originated, where there were these two weird old people on the staff, and when you're looking at the work schedule, both of us heard this from so many people. People would come in, they would look at the work schedule and look specifically to see if we were working, because that would make the day go better. But the day would go better in two very different ways, because Deb would lift people up and make them feel warm and welcome and chat with them, and I would mock them. They loved them both. They loved both approaches, but they were very different. And that's where I met Sam. So that would be, oh God, I don't even know, 15 years? More than that? I don't even know. He's gotten older. While I've stayed the same. I was 28 when we met. Let's see here. Al Rondelburen says, have you ever read any Turkish authors? And if so, who are your favorites? I love Turkish authors, and it's an annoyance to me that in a book culture, in an American book culture that seems more and more open to translated works, that most Americans have no idea of the incredible richness of Turkish literary history. Most of them have no idea, none whatsoever. They might, if pressed, know the name of a great epic or two, but they don't know any modern authors at all. None of that incredibly rich stuff. The author that I listed here is Peyami Safa, a tragic figure, but also a prolific one. And of course, in his case, as in so many other cases, I would prefer his nonfiction to his fiction. But what I wouldn't give if there was a big, a Safa reader. Wouldn't that be great? Just a 700-page Safa reader in English with a new translation, new introduction, new notes. Oh, editions like that for a whole bunch of writers, including a whole bunch of the people that he published and that he knew and that published him. Editions like that would do a lot to change that blinkered attitude. Let's see here. Wayne Wilkinson says, which biography of Hadrian would you suggest? He says he's only aware of the ones by Burley and Everett. Those are the two that I would suggest. I plan to do a Hadrian and Antinous month this summer and read several nonfiction books and novelizations of their relationship. For those of you who don't know, Antinous was a gorgeous lover of the Roman Emperor Hadrian, who killed himself. Not Hadrian. Wishful thinking there. No, Antinous did. And their relationship has spurred a huge number of books. Just huge. There's one that you're not mentioning that's not coming to mind. It is, in fact, the Hadrian biography, the Hadrian and Antinous biography that I have on the shelf out there. I'll have to remember to get the name and jot it down below. But in terms of fictional representations, I want to stress a couple. One that needs no introduction, you will certainly know it, and that is The Memoirs of Hadrian by Marguerite Yourcenar. Even in English, any English translation, just an amazing work, a weird, amazing work. But there is one that was published by a very small publisher. You might not have heard about it. It is worth your time to find. It's Eromenos by Melanie MacDonald, on this exact same subject. Just hunt it down. I don't know if it's still in print, but I'm sure you can find a copy. It's a slim thing. Well worth your time, especially if you're doing a dedicated study of this. Then it's well worth your time. I wish I could remember the name of the big fat one that I'm thinking of. I don't think that it was Burley or Everett. I'll have to look for it and see when I post this. If this isn't too long to post, I have no idea. Let's see here. Wayne has another question. Despite Norton's recent single-volume publication of Bassani's Ferrara novels, if someone was to purchase them individually, which novel would be the best to start with? I would pick the most popular one, The Garden of the Finzi Continis. Just start with that. That was the most popular one by far, and that will give you a good taste. If you don't like what's happening in that book, then you're not going to like the rest of them. And I think you will. So, even in English, I think you will. Michael Mullen says, where do you stand on the American dirt controversy? Is it just me, or do sensitivity readers and overly sensitive readers really just need to get over themselves? Those of you who might not know, this was a novel that an author wrote about a traumatic border crossing from on the American southern border, and that was viciously taken to task on social media, viciously, by the people who live on social media to do that, who were perfectly okay canceling this author. The author received death threats for cultural appropriation was the term that was bandied about, because this author, I guess, was not smuggled into America by coyotes herself or whatever. And the question came up earlier in a Q&A, and I said that the book is nothing special. It has the strengths and weaknesses of any debut novel. And then Jason, Little Blues chapter and verse, pointed out to me that it's the author's third or fourth book. Which means that it's a bad book. He's entirely right. If I'm saying, I thought it was a debut, if I'm saying that it has all the weaknesses of a debut novel and it's the third or fourth book the author's written, then that is very bad. But one way or another, yeah, the scandal here was the sheer virulent racism of the people objecting to the book. The book itself is not objectionable, as you can tell by the fact that many seasoned book critics liked it. Many seasoned people who know a hack from a handsaw liked it just fine. Some were even over the moon about it. So, but that wouldn't matter anyway. They could have hated it anyway. The reaction on social media was rabid. It was exactly the kind of viper pit that social media can be, that it is social media at its worst. Let's see here. Lisa Garrity says, Anthony Adverse is over 1,200 pages. Yes, it is. Is it worth the investment of my reading time? Oh, my God. All right, well, Anthony Adverse, for those of you who don't know, is a doorstop of a historical novel from a bygone era when everybody read it. And it is worth your... Well, let's put it this way. Find a copy and read the first 100 pages. Now, not the first... Usually I would say 15 or 20 pages because your time is precious. But... in a case of something like this, or Romain Rolando, in a case of a huge old-style doorstop historical novel, you have to give it more time. You have to give it time, like the Far Pavilions. You have to give it time enough to realize whether or not the author's rhythms are going to appeal to you, and they won't happen in 20 pages. So what I'm suggesting is find a copy of the book and invest for 100 pages. And if at the end of 100 pages you want to keep going, well, the rest of the book is like that, and you're going to like it. I love it. I wish that Anthony Adverse was a Penguin classic. I wish that it existed in a version somewhere that I could buy, because I'd love to reread it. I'd reread it with you. Let's see here. Strike the Sun MD says, what about Stephen King's writing doesn't do it for you? What does? I think he's a terrible writer, but I laugh on almost every page for every bad word choice, character decision, or plot point. I don't enjoy reading him, but I enjoy the unintentional laughs. Well, okay. In a way, I could agree with that. In a way, I could say, sure, he's kind of gallows humor funny to watch somebody who has spent literally his whole life writing, who has never learned how to do it even passably well, much less brilliantly. You'd think that if you hammered away at one thing over and over again for all this time, and the reason that he hasn't learned is because he hasn't had to. He's been adulated from almost the beginning for making mistakes. He's been adulated for novels that he wrote when he was completely unconscious on drugs and alcohol. And people still saying, this is just incredible, this is what I'm going to define my life by. Well, if you tell that to somebody on their fifth novel, then there's no way you can expect their 55th novel to be any different. You've already told them what they don't need to do. They don't need to work. And so that is a way to look at his books. But I would argue that if that's why you're reading a 1,000-page book by Stephen King, you should stop, because that's valuable time. You could get hit by a bus tomorrow. If you need recommendations for authors that don't make you pity or hate laugh, I'm right here, and I'm happy to make them. Let's see, how are we doing for time? Oh, God, this is just never ending. Isn't it so much fun? Nicola Lodge Bruce says, if you were told by a doctor that you had only a year to live, would you stop reading new works and just reread old favorites? Because why start something new that could be a literal waste of your precious time? Or would you just keep on as you are? After all, doctors aren't always right. You're right. Doctors aren't always right. Sometimes a young doctor with an interesting tie clip will look over a desk at you and tell you pretty much exactly that, and he will be wrong. My answer to the question is that I would do neither. In a circumstance like that, if a doctor were to say that to me, then this is really advanced, we didn't catch it in time, you have an incredibly weird pain threshold ratio that had you ignoring this until it's too late, but we'll try to get you some quality time, and this is what it's going to be like. If a young doctor, let's say in Cambridge, Massachusetts, were to tell that to me across a desk, when his mind is clearly elsewhere and he has that same thing to say to 6 other people and you are nothing special. When I walked out of that office, I would probably decide not to read new stuff or old stuff, but to write like the Dickens, to write like crazy, write like crazy. And that is the point that I make on this channel to every single one of you, especially young people. Every single one of you should treat every day as if you have just heard that from a doctor. You're right, doctors aren't always right, but sometimes they are. And sometimes they don't even get a chance to weigh in. You should be making things. Make things. Don't wait. Don't put it off. Don't wait. Get to work right away. If you have a project that's been stalled, revive it today. Do it today and get to work on it. Anyway, sorry. Nathan Fong says, have you ever considered or have translated any text to English for publication or for fun? For fun, I have, yes. Including, or 10 years ago, 15 years ago, a friend of mine asked me to translate Suetonius' life of the Emperor Tiberius and footnote it. And I did. I had a blast doing it. It was so much fun. I might try it again. I might try something like that again. That would be a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. I've always been meaning to go back and do something like that again. I also asked, have you ever written any poetry? Very limited. Very, very limited. I write, and it's going to seem really weird, but I write a death poem for every dog I lose. I don't do it for humans that I lose. I do it for dogs. In all kinds of different styles and formats and meters and whatnot, and voices. And just the one. Just a death poem for each dog. And that's it. I don't do any other poetry. That's a very Irish answer. Sorry about that. How's your culinary skills coming along? What's your go-to dish if you need to impress a guest? Do you have a favorite dish or wine? I don't impress my guests with my own meals. I don't do that at all. If I want to impress them, I buy them food. I have very few go-to dishes because I don't live to eat. I eat to live. So I beans, rice, that sort of thing. Very simple stuff. And occasionally a organic free-range egg or two. And as my favorite dish, I don't have a favorite dish, but in terms of actual culinary ware, I only have one dish. The actual thing, an actual plate, I only have one. My surly houseboy drew the line because I don't understand you humans and your incredible predilection for washing your dishes. Why would you do that and wipe out all the old smells? Why would you do that? It's just so weird. It's just a weird thing to do, and apparently that doesn't fly. As my surly houseboy put it years and years ago, some of us can get sick, you know. So I have one dish. And as for wine, a nice dry red wine, Cabernet Sauvignon or something like that. I do not care how old it is. I do not care how precious it is. Chateau Thames Embankment is absolutely fine by me. Pomeroy is very, very ordinary. When it comes to dry red wine, the only thing I care about is quantity, not quality. Housekeeping says, what's your favorite Argentine author? And what do you think of Jorge Luis Borges, Castillo? Oh God, the whole list of... my favorite is Ernesto Sabato. But again, like with Turkish authors, I think there's an underrepresentation here. I wish that we were dealing with a lot more. I wish that Penguin Classics, right behind me, had a vast amount more of, I mean, money. There's only so much money in the world, but I wish that Argentinian authors were better known. And of course, when it comes to Borges, I prefer that beautiful English language volume of his nonfiction as opposed to his fiction. You saw that. You knew that already. I just thought I'd say it. Maybury Book Club says, what is your favorite meal to make at home? One of some of the funniest novels you've read. Funniest novels, I always revert to P.G. Wodehouse. I just think they're a hoot. I found a mass market paperback of Mating Season and reread it and was just all caught up all over again in all the choices, the little choices that he makes. And favorite meal to make at home? It varies. I don't really put a whole lot of thought into it. My very favorite meals to make, I can't make anymore because they all involve bacon. So, Link Joker says, number 1, thoughts on the death of Superman and all the aftermath from the storyline. You can guess, right? You can guess. The death of Superman, the story, let's kill him off, was done at the spur of the moment. with no advanced planning, just to goose sales. So of course I was against it. Of course I was. If you stick to it, well, then you've killed the greatest comic book character of all time. And if you don't stick to it, then the greatest comic book character of all time has died and realized it doesn't take. So either way, you've made a huge dramatic misstep. So I also wasn't a big fan of a lot of the artwork styles that were going on at the time. Jackson Guise, oh God. So I wasn't a big fan of any part of it. Even the return with Superman having a mullet. Business in the front, party in the back. It was ridiculous. All of it. I wanted it to be over. I wanted Superman to be back in his normal costume with his normal superpowers. Because that's the cycle. That's always the cycle. Some writer is given permission to do something sacrilegious with Superman, split him in two as energy beings, or give him long hair, or remove his superpowers seemingly permanently, or whatever. And or the New 52, whatever that creature was, that eventually the whole arc is going to come back to the normal, traditional Superman. So why ever... anyway, let's see here. Link Joker's second question is, thoughts on the advice, follow your dream, especially in regards to choosing a career. I would always say don't quit your day job, because otherwise you're going to be bitter about your career. You're going to be bitter about your dream, because following your dream doesn't, it could still elude you. It could travel faster than you do. So I would always suggest something practical. I know that's a little bit weird coming from somebody who is a freelance writer for a profession, but still. Number 3 is his third question, or their third question is, of the 4 Chinese classics, which is your favorite? There are 4 canonical great Chinese classics, and of course mine is Water Margin. Of course it is. If you just step back and think, okay, what is actually happening in these 4 classics? If you were to step back and just think that, don't think literary antecedents or any quality or anything like that, just think what happens in the books, I think you'd immediately think, oh, okay, Water Margin would be Steve's favorite. And the last one, do you like your own writing voice? Yes, I do. What a great question. Yes, I do. It's the most elusive thing that any writer can ever do, is to discover their voice. It takes lots of trial and error, lots of borrowing and stealing, lots of adapting, lots of time. Usually. It's only been, in my experience, I've only known a couple of writers who had their voice right away. Usually you have to come to it. And when you do, then all you want is to write in that voice. Certainly that is true for book reviewing. I review for a lot of venues, in a lot of different formats, a lot of different reasons for the review, and sometimes not credited. So I don't always get to write book reviews in my own voice, which means that when I come to, for instance, Open Letters Review, the online literary journal where I'm an editor, and where nobody has any say over me, those reviews I can write in my own voice, and that can feel just wonderful, like a romp in the park, especially if I'm coming off a few reviews where I couldn't really give vent to my full voice. That is always the goal in a paid publishing venue. The goal is to establish a relationship with your editor, and more importantly with your readers, such that after a certain amount of time you can write in your own voice for that venue and still get paid to do it. That is the dream for me. And I'm close. I do that from time to time with some of my venues, but with Open Letters I get to do it whenever I want. But it's a tough thing. If I were to do regular AuthorTube videos about writing, we would talk a lot about voice. We would talk a lot about it, because it's not only tough, it's incredibly elusive. It's a tough subject to even get at. I would love to discuss that. It's the whole question of whether or not I should do regular AuthorTube videos. Let's see. Pints and Paperbacks asks, opinion on literary agents. Don't get me started. Better to try your hand at getting represented or publish independently right now. Seems like a lot of the agent world wants diversity bingo books, as you put it. What's your best advice in that area? Well, I have horror stories, of course, myself. Years and years and years ago, I wrote a long Roman historical epic, historical novel called Optimus, that was narrated in the first person by the Roman Emperor Trajan's personal physician. To use just as one example, it was 600-something pages long, and I was told at the time, all of the self-help manuals, all the people that I talked to, all the authors that I talked to said, yeah, you gotta, there was hardly, at the time I did, there was hardly any self-publishing world at all. So people told me, yeah, you gotta get an agent. And then, if your agent takes on the book, they'll represent you, they'll flog it around, you'll get a publisher, and then you'll have to deal with an editor. And I thought, okay, well, that's fairly standard. I've read a million books in which authors talk about that. So I started submitting it around to agents, and was amazed to find that agents act like publisher readers. They have taken on the role. It used to be that major publishing houses had, in addition to editors, they had readers. The readers would read the vast piles of stuff that were sent in and flag the good stuff. They would take home 6 or 7 books a night, and that was all they did. They were paid rather poorly, but they were the gatekeepers. They were the ones who would push forward the good stuff to the editors, who would then make a decision on whether or not to tender an offer. And from what I've been able to determine, most major publishers don't have readers anymore. Agents have become their readers. But a publisher's reader had a lot of experience and qualification, and most agents don't. They don't have the time to read anything. and I sent this manuscript of mine to a few of those agents and got back the dumbest responses, and also high-handed, megalomaniac, power-drunk responses. One agent wrote back to me and in all seriousness said, it's a fairly good manuscript. The only thing is that you'd have to change the narrator. Every single word of every single page, in other words, I'd have to change. And then maybe you'd consider representing it to a publisher. Still no idea whether or not a publisher would take it, but maybe you, the agent, would consider representing it if I changed literally every word on every page. That's sort of soured the whole experience for me. And I gather that it soured the whole experience for a lot of people, because self-publishing is now an incredible new venue. It is an incredible thing. It lacks only one thing. There's only one element, aside from bragging rights. Let's leave out the social perception. Aside from that, there's only one practical element that you get with traditional publishing that you don't get with self-publishing, and that is publicity, distribution and publicity, where you get signed on to speaking gigs at Politics and Prose, or your book is stacked in a bookstore. And those of you who are traditionally published, if there's anybody, well, there are 6 people I know at least who are traditionally published who are watching this video, you will have horror stories about how your publisher, or sometimes a very big publisher, just plain let you down on both those things. I've had traditionally published authors, especially new authors, be told by their publisher, yeah, we got to set up a speaking gig for you, in Poughkeepsie. So here's a box of your books. Put that in the trunk of your car and get going. So we're not going to fly you there. Don't be ridiculous. Money doesn't grow on trees or like that. Whereas the self-publishing world has grown now and proliferated now and is so easy and well done now that there are a great number of wealthy authors. There are a great number of authors who wouldn't go back to getting. I mean, if you're a traditionally published author, the total amount of money that is earned by your book, you get a tiny trickle of it. Less than 10% in some cases. Whereas in self-publishing, you get a vast percentage of what your book earns. And it's up to you to earn that money, but the point I'm making is that it's largely up to most traditionally published authors to earn that money anyway, with a system that then doesn't reward them. So I have in the last 25 years, I have never dealt with a book agent who wasn't an a-hole. A traditional book agent whose goal was to maybe represent your book to a major author. So I don't know. I realize that it's the dream of a lot of people on AuthorTube, for instance, to get traditionally published. And every person who's traditionally published sings the praises of their agent. You read their acknowledgement section, they all have the very best agent in the world. I can't help but think there's a lot of Stockholm Syndrome there. So I don't know what to say. I myself, if I were going to do it, I would not even consider traditional publishing. Not even for a minute. I wouldn't even consider it. Self-publishing has everything that I would want, except for hitting the road to Poughkeepsie in my own car, or stuff like that. And I'm not really sure, ultimately, how much that kind of stuff, being stacked in a bookstore or going to an event, I'm not sure how much that translates to in way of sales. I have never seen any reliable figures that show that it makes all that much of a difference. Not at the beginning, anyway. A major author, maybe, but at the beginning, I think you'd be just as well off having control of your own show, which is what the best self-publishing venues allow. So I would offer that when I eventually do collect book reviews, expand them, and write a book on book reviews, that's certainly the way I'll go. I wouldn't even think about it otherwise. But the same thing is true of novels. I would self-publish a novel, absolutely, before I would go to a traditional route. Let's see here. Are we going long again? Oh my God, we are. We're nowhere near done. All right, let's stop at pints and paperbacks, and then we will resume. We will pick this up again. Oh my God, sorry about this. I'll film these now, but I might upload them on different days. Anyway, I'll wrap this up, and I'll be back.